So he's basically claiming that the AP's journalism is not influenced by them being paid $8 million to them. Would you believe there's a new report that shows left-wing groups have been funding climate alarmism in journalism? How much? To the tune of $8 million. You can kind of convey whatever information you want if you pay enough money. Welcome back to the JP Reacts channel, where we love to call out the lies, hypocrisy, and corruption of tyrants. And in my opinion, if any form of journalism isn't either based on truth or an earnest effort to arrive at truth, then it is in fact propaganda. So is what we see, all the fear-mongering in the media about the climate's getting worse, it's gonna definitely get a lot worse, and the climate's gonna get you. Is all that propaganda, or is some of it propaganda? And is there any truth? Is there any earnest effort to convey the truth about what's going on in the climate? Well, a new report, and I'm gonna reference the Daily Wire, who published a report on the report, shows there's been left-wing groups funding journalists to publish alarmism about the climate. Before we get into the article, I have to ask, if you have to pay for certain information to be covered by journalism, then is that information worthy of being covered in the first place? Journalism in its truest, purest form seeks to expose truth. So if there is a very apparent truth out there to be found, journalism will naturally cover it. So the idea that climate alarmism is being bought and paid for to infiltrate into journalism, that alone makes me very suspect. Let's go into a few key points of the article found on the Daily Wire. Here we see, top of the article, 5 nonprofit groups published a report Wednesday debunking mainstream media claims about the disastrous impacts of the so-called climate crisis this year, which also included receiving millions of dollars to fund climate coverage. The Climate Fact Check 2022 report, created by all these lovely looking institutions, highlighted 10 fact checks of climate disaster claims made by several media outlets like the Associated Press, ever heard of them? Which took $8 million in donations from left-wing philanthropy groups to cover climate change. They're philanthropy, so they're good-willed people. Trust them. They're philanthropists. Bill Gates is a philanthropist. Trust him. Sam Bankman-Fried, he told us he was a philanthropist. He was actually an effective altruist as well. We know because they told us, so that's what we should believe about them. Philanthropy. It goes on. Climate alarmists and their media allies once again made a slew of claims about natural disasters being caused by man-made emissions in 2022. And once again, these claims clashed with the reality and science. I have to be really careful of how much I share my opinion here, because YouTube itself will take down videos, they'll demonetize you, they will deplatform you for speaking too much into the reality and actual science about climate. YouTube has deplatformed actual meteorologists reporting on the climate. Specifically, their reports are showing how, hey, variations in the climate are well within normal ranges, and historically, this always happens. So YouTube says, well, your science isn't welcome here, you're out. So we continue. According to this report, the Associated Press received donations from large foundations pushing climate alarmism. Why would they want to push climate alarmism? What happens when you scare people? Are they more controllable or less controllable? I don't know. I'm sure they've never considered that. Such groups include the William and Floral Hewlett Foundation, the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, Quadrivium, the Rockefeller Foundation, Rockefellers, they're great, and the Walton Family Foundation. One example of the alarmism in journalism that's been funded is here, written by AP reporter Seth Borenstein, called New Abnormal, Climate Disaster Damage Down to $268 billion, which said some worldwide natural disasters like the Pakistan floods, Hurricane Ian, and droughts stretching from Europe to China were turbocharged by human-caused climate change. Turbocharge, that's a very scientific word. And turbocharging climate crisis, that's not fear-mongering. Turbocharge, as we know, is a scientifically validated word used in meteorology all the time. According to the Climate Fact Check report, the Pakistan floods and the 2022 monsoon season were within the range of natural variability and the wettest since 1961. So this fact check report is unfortunately not coming from our normally trusted, super independent fact checkers. This fact check report, of course, is what's running contrary to the climate alarmism in journalism, saying like, oh, no, these disasters that have been reported on as being caused by man-made climate change, they're actually within the range of natural variability. And of course, it highlights, to no surprise, mainstream media outlets blamed Hurricane Ian, the Category 4 disaster that was the deadliest hurricane to strike Florida since 1935, on climate change for the storm's rapid intensification. Still, the report references the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which points out that the Atlantic Basin hurricane activity is within natural variability after a historically quiet first few months of the hurricane season. That's these people who are apparently not funded by special interest groups saying like, oh, these natural disasters, they're unfortunate, but they are in fact natural. They're within the range of natural variability. And you have to think, there's natural disasters, hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, droughts, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes even. Those come from nature. Some of nature's occurrences are going to be more severe than others. And if time goes on long enough, we're certainly going to see some peaks. Now, we can point to those and say like, okay, that's nature doing its thing. It sucks if you're in it. It really does. But nature has more intensity and lesser intensity at some point. So over the course of a given amount of time, you're going to see some natural disasters that are worse than others. So you can either acknowledge that, or you can just close your eyes and say, well, if one's like worse than others, then there's only one reason why it would be worse than others. Is that because nature made it worse than others? Nope. Nature has nothing to do with natural disasters. Humans did it. That's the only suspect. And the report asks, is this money funding actual journalism or just rank political activism? The Associated Press admitted in a report published earlier this year that the news organization received $8 million over 3 years from various groups, leading the media group employing more than 24 journalists across the globe to cover climate crisis issues. It's pretty interesting. And then Fox News reported that the AP News vice president, Brian Caravillano, so the vice president of AP News, he says he's claimed to only accept money without strings attached. So he's basically claiming that the AP's journalism covering climate alarmism is not influenced by them being paid $8 million to them. Saying there's no strings attached in our journalism. Well, guess what? Money is the string. So as this report shows, climate alarmism in journalism is in fact being funded with millions of dollars by left-wing groups. So we have to ask ourselves, why? Are these left-wing groups more interested in funding truth to get to you? Or are they more interested in fear-mongering you? Have left-wing groups shown a track record in the past few years of using fear to control people? You get to be the judge of that. I've got my opinion, but what's your opinion on that? We do know that the more people are afraid, the more controllable they are. So then we have to ask ourselves, if they are using climate alarmism as a tool with which to fearmonger people so they're more controllable, why do they want to control people? It takes a pretty sick human to want to control other humans. And if you're not able to physically control them, then you psychologically control them with fear. Sometimes when I look at the alarmism going on all throughout the media, and we see it, Al Gore, he warned us, he was right, the sea levels were going to rise, have the coast of the U.S. underwater by 2016. I mean, their predictions, they always come true, just like Al Gore's did. So when I look at all the fear-mongering about climate, true or false, but it's fear-mongering going on about climate, I always remember like these historical examples, like you think back to the ancient Mayan days. And, this is we see examples all throughout these ancient civilizations where you have a king, and the king has enslaved massive amounts of people. He uses them for slave labor, like, build that pyramid, build that temple. You might get crushed under the stone, but keep going. We need to push that rock, crush them, I don't care. People just being abused, worked to death, and their lives just completely disregarded. How were these people enslaved? Well, there's a pattern. The king would typically claim special knowledge. It's like, hey guys, I want you common people to know I've been talking to God. Now, I realize you don't have access to communicate with God, so you're going to have to take my word for it. But God told me he commands your obedience to me. That's what God wants of you. God also told me that if you are not strictly obedient to me, he will punish you with horrendous consequences. Now, the people who bought into that, they were controlled by fear. They're like, well, we don't have a way to disprove what the king said. I mean, I can't talk to God, and he told me that he talks to God, so golly, I guess we're going to believe him because it's kind of scary not to. And then we look at the kings of today, which are far from kings, but we look at the elites who claim to have specialized knowledge. Hey, common people, guess what? We know that the climate is getting horrendous and is going to be even more horrendous. Like, how do you know? Well, we have high-tech instruments that study this stuff. You don't have those, do you? No, we don't have those. All right, so you're going to have to take my word for it. So you need to obey me. What we're going to do, we're going to change all these carbon emissions. We're going to make sure the Dutch farmers can't grow food. Germany can't use fertilizer. We're going to Green New Deal the whole world up and implement a social credit score, carbon emissions. We got to track everybody because we have to fight this climate crisis that's coming your way. And if you don't obey me, the climate is going to punish you with horrendous consequences. Then you and I get to either say, well, I don't have my own climate scientific instruments to study historical patterns as well as what's going on today. So we can either say, all right, King, I believe you. I will do as you tell me. Or we can say, you know what, King? No, I'm not going to obey you, nor do I fear the consequences with which you're trying to scare me with. The choice is ours. That's a little coverage on the climate alarmism that's being funded in journalism. What matters most is you and I make up our own minds about what's going on and what, if anything, we want to do about it, and using our own critical thinking to discern what seems like the purest truth for us to buy into in the moment. Because the last thing I want to do is be one of the idiots we look back on in ancient civilizations, be like, dude, can you believe those people? They just believed the stories the king made up and told them in order to scare them into slavery. My choice is not to be a slave motivated by fear. My choice is to be a free, sovereign individual motivated by truth and love. You get to decide for you. And with that said, my friend, thank you for joining me for this special journalism report, which is funded by absolutely no one. So you can tell I'm probably full of crap. I'm just trying to push propaganda because nobody pays me to do so. And with that said, I'll see you here on this channel for our next video. But until then, stay free.